So, oh, the other thing I keep forgetting to bring, and I have a gallon of naphtha I'm going to bring. When you're cutting on acrylic, one thing you'll notice is that when it cuts, it'll make smoke, and some of that smoke, because it's hot plastic, will immediately redeposit right there, and it'll make a kind of smokiness around your lines, and especially if you're cutting something.
Oh, that was the trick you were talking to Tech about on that.
Yes. So if you're cutting all the way through a piece of acrylic, leave the paper on because it protects the edge and it gives you a cleaner edge. But if you're doing like my little building model and you have to cut all the way through but also etch, that means you have to peel the paper off because you don't want to deal with having to peel off 100,000 little tiny pieces of paper. You peel it, you shoot it, and then there'll be this little smokiness. You just take a paper towel, you don't need much, just damp with naphtha, and rub it down and just go away. Shines it up real nice.
How long can you wait until after you cut or etch to do that?
Forever.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. It basically just is a mild solvent that dissolves the plastic a teeny tiny bit and works really well. I don't think it works on ABS, but ABS is kind of a more, it's not a smooth material. You've got one side that's textured and one side that's just crappy from coming out of the mill. It's a foamed plastic, not a cast plastic. So it's meant for some more structural sort of things because it's stronger but more flexible. Like you can see here, it takes a lot before that snaps. It's real bendy. Acrylic, on the other hand, is strong but it's brittle. So it'll just snap right off on you. And that's also what gives it the ability to capture a lot of detail. You'll notice ABS, it's hard to get fine lines. It's the way the material is, it reflows. Acrylic, pretty well.
Vaporizes.
I mean, you're not going to see it on the camera, but it vaporizes pretty good, and it leaves a really smooth edge. It really does. You'll never be able to get that kind of detail in ABS just because of the way it is. Wood, when you're doing wood, so much of it depends on the grain of the wood. It's also harder to reproduce stuff in wood because plastic, you know that every sheet of acrylic of the same thickness and the same color is going to be basically identical. Reproduce stuff easily. Wood, it depends on the species, how close the grain was, did it rain in Oregon that year, and it's going to cut a little differently every time, so I leave that as an exercise to the reader. Yeah, I mean, really, that's the basics. That's what you need to know to begin to play around with it and operate it safely.
Can you show us the focusing procedure again?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Because I didn't quite catch that either conceptually or operationally.
Oh, and it's always good practice to take it out, take everything out before you tell the machine to restart because it'll home and then come back. And if you have material that's too thick, it'll just start shoving it around, and that's not good. Yeah. Oh, and the other thing I should point out, it's possible for this head to go up and down and to rotate. Generally leave it alone because it's also possible to have this thing such that you can't take it to the edge and have nothing hit. See, like if I was to take this thing and turn it 90, it would work right up until it did this, in which case it would smash that limit switch against the edge, which isn't good. So, really, don't fool with it. Oh, and this little pointer beam is, of course, nothing whatsoever to do with the main beam.
That's the red dot that we see.
Yeah, it's just a laser pointer. It can, just through vibration, work its way loose. I don't want to touch it because it's dialed right in right now. But this thing is screwed in just tight enough where you can tweak it. If you notice it is off, feel free to just tip it up or down a little bit, get it back into line. So it really does help when you're trying to frame stuff up, and you want to get as tight as possible so you don't waste material. But on to focusing. Hit the Z-axis button. Z-axis move and bring it down good ways. Put your material down, put a focus gauge down, and then bring it up, and it'll stop at the right point. It won't allow you to bring it up with that switch actuated. and that's it.
So which button did you press to get it to do that?
The Z button right here.
Okay, the one in the middle.
Yep. Yeah, and none of this other stuff really does anything. Like, some of it really doesn't do anything, and some of it just does stuff you don't want to do. So Z-axis move is the only thing in that menu you care about.
So when you put a focus gauge on that plastic, and then you hit Z move, and it brings it up, and you have to be paying attention.
No,
It does it automatically.
Yeah, like watch this.
Oh, okay, that's what the switch is for.
Hard cuts it off.
Okay. These are both identical, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and they're kind of scarred up because I've used them for just testing stuff, but it doesn't matter. That's what they're for. Oh, the other thing you can do with this, forgot to mention this. Let me get a piece of acrylic, because this Lexan's kind of smoky and terrible. Yeah, can you hand me that white one? Right there. Yeah. So you want to figure out what is the right power level and speed and all that kind of stuff. So, turn the power on. What you'll want to do, you can also adjust the power and speed right here on the panel. The highest speed's 500 millimeters a second. It's great for just getting around, but I want to see what it's going to take to cut this material. So, hit speed. I'm going to turn it down to, let's try 20 millimeters a second. I think that's about right. It's at, well, it only goes up to 90 for some reason, but it's at maximum power. I hit laser, then I'm going to bring it down. This is a firmware glitch. If you see it doing that, sometimes it'll continue to move on its own after you release the buttons. Sometimes it'll continue to move on its own with the laser firing after you take your finger off the buttons. Usually one more button press will, I don't know, whatever routine that is, sets it straight and stops. Or you can just hit the master stop, and that will stop. So, let's see how that turned out. Didn't quite make it. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah. It just barely didn't make it. So maybe you want to try 19 or 18. But that's how you can basically. And if you see it went all the way through, and it made little blast marks on the other side from the reflections, that's an indicator that you might want to turn it down a little bit, because when you peel your paper back, you'll have, even after you hit it with naphtha, you'll have little scars that won't come out. So, I mean, the same thing with raster scan, although there, what you want to do is put a piece of material in, maybe take a scrap, like this would be perfect. No one's going to use this for anything, it's just too awkward, but it's a great piece of test material. So if I want to figure out the power level for a raster scan, it doesn't matter if the file's this big, I just want to do a tiny bit before I abort it, just to see what it looks like. So, yeah, that's focusing and setting power levels. And, turn it back up. So did I mention origin and frame? Oh, okay. When you got your pattern to where you want it, hit the origin button. That tells it that where it is right now is where you want the upper right-hand corner of your drawing to be. Then if you hit frame, it'll trace the maximum extents. So you can tell if the piece you have is big enough or if it's lined up right. So, and that'll persist until it gets reset. So turn the machine back on, it'll home, and then it'll return to its origin. the other thing that's kind of possible to do, if you bounce the stop switch really fast, there's still enough power in the capacitors to hold the contactor shut. And if it does that, usually the board will crash. It's no big deal. Just hold it down, and it'll go off and turn back on. I think that's just about it. I can't think of anything else. Questions?
Is there a manual for this that we can...
No.
In Chinese, right?
In really bad English, and it's not worth reading. It will actually damage your brain. So.
All right, well, thanks a lot, man.